All right, let's just jump right into this one because we are opening up an explainer on a truly groundbreaking piece of medical history. We're looking at a 1917 book by Dr. William J. Robinson called Woman, Her Sex and Love Life. Now, to really grasp why this text hit like an absolute earthquake, you have to put yourself in that 1917 mindset. This was a wildly restrictive era regarding women's bodies. I mean, even whispering about female anatomy was incredibly taboo. Medical knowledge, heavily gatekept. Public discussions of intimacy, completely veiled in shame and silence. So into that deeply stifling atmosphere, Dr. Robinson steps up and writes a comprehensive, no-holds-barred medical guide. It is a stunning look at the history of women's health, and honestly a profound act of rebellion against the extreme censorship of that time. But here's what's so fascinating. To kind of soften this highly taboo subject, the author actually hooks his readers right out of the gate with this exquisitely charming Hindu legend about Twastri, the Vulcan of mythology, creating woman. He writes that Twastri didn't just use solid elements. No, he took the roundness of the moon, the sweet flavor of honey, and even the cruelty of the tiger to form her. It's beautiful, right? Dr. Robinson intentionally used this poetic, mythological approach to disarm his very conservative readers. He's gently inviting them into a conversation that, well, they'd literally been taught to fear their entire lives. And the myth beautifully illustrates this legendary paradox of the sexes. We see the mythological man complaining to the god that he just can't handle this new creature, right? Only to come back days later admitting his life is simply too solitary without her. And the god's final booming ruling, neither can you live without her. It sets up this profoundly poetic literary framing, highlighting the intense emotional entanglement of men and women. We get to linger on this romanticized myth for just a second before the book takes a massive pivot. Seriously, the tone shifts dramatically from ancient mythology straight into the unforgiving, hard medical and social realities of 1917. So, here is how we are going to unpack this massive, controversial explainer today. We'll start with the creation of woman, then look at breaking a 1917 taboo, dive into the high stakes of ignorance, cover teaching internal anatomy, and finally, demystifying external genitals. Section 1. The Creation of Woman, a Poetic 1917 Framing. Section 2. Breaking a 1917 Taboo, Dr. Robinson's Radical Book. Okay, looking at the title page of this 1917 text, it is so crucial to remember the dire context of the era. In his preface, the author claimed there was not a single satisfactory sex book for girls and women in existence, not one. For a young woman at the time, this meant a total void of information. Imagine that. They were stepping into marriage, intimacy, and childbirth in utter darkness. Dr. Robinson was fiercely determined to fill this void without the compromise, the hypocrisy, or the prudish sentimentality that usually cloaked the subject. He fundamentally believed that hiding medical realities behind polite metaphors was actually doing active harm. And he definitely didn't hold back. Just look at the sheer volume of forbidden topics he tackled, things most physicians wouldn't dare whisper in public. He dove straight into venereal diseases, birth control, the habits of masturbation, and the single standard of morality. Publishing this kind of comprehensive medical curriculum for the everyday woman, that was an incredibly risky career move for a doctor back then. Discussing the limitation of offspring or exposing disastrous double standards head-on meant challenging the very foundation of medieval superstitions and societal control. But, he laid it all out there clearly and step by step, believing that plain honesty was the absolute only cure for public ignorance. Section 3. The High Stakes of Ignorance, the Cost of a Misstep. So in 1917, a youthful indiscretion had vastly different consequences depending on your gender. And the author breaks down this stark contrast to prove exactly why sex education was literally a matter of survival. As Robinson outlines it, a boy could rashly indulge, catch a curable physical disease, yet entirely retain his social standing. He'd have absolutely no difficulty marrying later on. But a girl? That exact same misstep meant physical, moral, and economic ruin. It meant facing the sheer terror of illegitimate motherhood or resorting to highly dangerous back-alley abortions. It meant becoming an absolute social outcast, entirely exiled from her community. For women, ignorance wasn't just a blind spot. It was a trap with fatal consequences. Dr. Robinson then leverages this famous Lord Byron quote to bridge the gap between his harsh sociological arguments and the profound emotional weight placed exclusively on women. Man's love is of man's life a thing apart, 'tis woman's whole existence. In 1917, The idea that a woman was fundamentally made for love was a massive societal belief. Because society dictated that romantic and marital success was a woman's entire existence, her romantic or sexual ruin was tantamount to the total destruction of her life. Practically speaking, a ruined reputation didn't just mean a few bad rumors. It meant being completely disowned by family, losing any prospect of financial support through marriage, and facing utter destitution and poverty. Adding physical reality to that heavy social stigma, he outlines what he frankly calls a woman's physical disabilities. Let's walk through this life cycle together because it is intense. He argues that women are heavily handicapped by nature, physically bound to their reproductive functions in ways men simply are not. From the monthly discomfort of menstruation and 9 extremely troublesome months of pregnancy to the incredibly painful ordeal of childbirth, lactation, and eventually the difficult years of menopause. Women carried an immense physiological burden for their entire adult lives. Robinson argued that demanding women endure this lifetime of physical hardship, while simultaneously denying them the fundamental knowledge of how their own bodies worked, was uniquely and profoundly cruel. Section 4. Teaching Internal Anatomy, a 1917 medical curriculum. To combat all of this dangerous ignorance, the text moves right into practical anatomical solutions. By breaking down the etymology of medical words, the author turns intimidating jargon into accessible, bite-sized education. Take the word salpinx, for example, which is Greek for tube. He explains that this refers to the fallopian tubes, tiny canals about 5 inches long that conduct eggs from the ovary to the uterus. By taking the mystery out of the Greek and Latin words, he effectively took the fear out of the female body. It's a wonderfully empowering approach that handed the power of understanding directly back to the patient. And it's fascinating how the uterus isn't depicted as completely rigid in these medical illustrations. He clinically points out that it's a hollow muscular organ about the size of a pear, but it can actually shift and bend forward, which is called anteversion or anteflexion, or it can bend backward. Educating women on these physical variations was groundbreaking. Imagine being a woman in 1917 experiencing mysterious pain or struggling with sterility. Understanding that your organs could simply shift or flex provided a logical medical reason for the discomfort. It entirely removed the terrifying fear of the unknown that plagued so many women of that era. Continuing this empowering vocabulary lesson, he goes on to demystify the vagina. Translating the Latin for a sheath, he describes it clinically and functionally as a fibromuscular canal serving as a passageway. But what's especially enlightening for his 1917 audience is his detailed explanation of its mechanical capability. He explains its ability to enormously stretch during childbirth, thanks to its inner folds known as rugae. Think about how utterly terrifying childbirth must have been for women who literally didn't understand that their bodies were mechanically designed to expand and adapt like that. Knowledge that seems so basic to us today was profoundly liberating back then. Section 5. Demystifying External Genitals, Plain Honest English. Here, the author tackles what was easily one of the most fraught topics of the era, the hymen. In 1917, the mythology surrounding the maidenhead was heavily weaponized against women. Accusations of impurity based on this anatomy could ruin marriages, destroy reputations, and isolate women from society forever. Robinson bravely debunked these toxic myths. By defining it simply as a membrane, he notes clinically that it can be broken by simple accidents like jumping or horseback riding, or hey, it could even be missing entirely from birth. He also outlined medical interventions for an imperforate hymen. This purely medical explanation acted as a massive scientific defense for a woman's honor, literally saving lives and marriages by stripping away the superstition. Robinson even brings a touch of history to the biology, pointing out that the ancients loved fanciful names. He defines the vulva from the Latin for a folding door, and he details the mons veneris, translating it as Venus's mountain. Giving these highly censored body parts historical, objective definitions helped strip away the deep-seated shame associated with them. By treating external anatomy with clinical, historical, and scientific respect, he completely removed the dark taboo shadow that society had cast over women's bodies. It was an approach that grounded highly sensitive information in objective, undeniable reality. Dr. Robinson's radical act of simply writing these facts down in plain English was a massive first crack in a towering wall of censorship. As we close this incredible historical explainer, it leaves us with a really provocative question to think about. Based on the foundational steps taken by brave, rule-breaking books like this in 1917, how far have women's health and sex education truly evolved today? It really makes you wonder just how much these early medical texts shaped the modern freedoms and bodily knowledge we take for granted right now. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this fascinating piece of medical history. Keep questioning and keep learning.